Welcome to Silicon Valley Nonprofits, a service of KMVT Community Media. I'm Bev Lenahan, your host, and today my guest is Bruce Goeas. He's president of Deep Hole Ministries. Thank you for coming today, Bruce. Nice to have you.
Great. Thank you very much for having me.
Well, we're going to talk about homelessness, and it seems like it is the topic that's on the news every single day these days, and it's certainly one of our critical problems to solve. But Deep Hole Ministries is going about it in a little different way than others. So tell us a little bit about what you do.
Great. Thanks a lot. I founded Deep Hole Ministries about a year ago. And it was shortly after writing a book on legacies that I really challenged myself and said, what is my legacy? What am I going to be doing? And our purpose is really pretty simple. It's to try and bring our homeless people out of the shadows. And for those who are willing and able, try and help them re-enter society as active members.
Mm-hmm. So one thing is figuring out what their shadows are, where they are.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, depending on the city you're in, these days we don't have to look too hard.
That's true.
San Francisco, San Jose, they're ever present, and the problem is getting larger. And so our vision is to really try and take them and reduce the U.S. homeless population by 50% by December of 2030.
Boy, that would be a legacy. Say that again. That is amazing.
Yeah, so to basically cut our U.S. homeless population in half in the next decade.
Wow, 50%. And U.S. wide. So that's quite a vision. My goodness. Well, I know you've got a lot ahead of you. So tell us a little bit about that vision. It's very far-reaching. Tell our viewers how you're going to go about this.
Okay, great. So there are 2 points. One is there's a lot of people doing some very great work. The mayor here in Mountain View and 2 people that she works with, Thomas and I want to say Melanie. They're just great working with the homeless. We have 2 of the best Veterans Administration homeless project managers here in San Francisco. Just have an absolute passion, and their goal is even more ambitious. They want to pull all the veterans off the street in the next decade. So. Hope's Corner here in Mountain View, providing shower services and food services, Project We Hope in East Palo Alto. So there's a lot of people focused on the environment. I see one of our roles as being an aggregator. So, So my background is a leadership and change consultant. And our model is really based on most contemporary change models. They have 3 phases, typically: your current state, which you're trying to change, some sort of transitional period, which is where the chaos and the distrust and the self-doubt occurs, and then a final period, which is kind of where we're going. Some call it ending, some call it new state.
I like new state.
Yeah.
It's not really an ending, it's almost a beginning.
Yeah. So we're mapping to that, right? So the first phase really is engagement, and that's what I'm involved in now. I'm trying to figure out who are all the resources, who's doing what well, so that I can refer that, and then where are the gaps so that we can fill those gaps. The engagement piece is also about building trust. One of the things that I've found over the last year is that many of the homeless feel there's been a violation of trust, some part of their life, many times in their life. And because of that, building their trust, earning their trust becomes important in trying to help them move forward.
It's often generational, too. They have 2 or 3 generations have lacked trust in others.
Absolutely.
And so that's one of the things that is a big obstacle to overcome, I think.
I think so, too. And especially like in the military communities, we have a lot of Vietnam vets who are still in the street. I mean, literally flew into Travis, were bused down to Fort Ord, and walked out the front gate, and they've been homeless ever since. And we'll talk about Monterey in a little bit because that's where they are. So the second phase is really around workshops that I've
Good.
designed. I'm calling them digging out workshops because deep holes and digging out. And they're really geared toward how do we get you to acknowledge your challenge and then move through that challenge, build a plan, and then re-enter society. And then the final piece is re-entry. So we call that elevation. So we have engage, empower, and elevate. And in Elevate, it's really about making sure they are connected with the resources. How do they find a job? How do they find a mentor to support them when things don't go quite the way they would like them to go or as planned? And then how do they find transitional housing and eventually permanent housing so that they can be true active members of our community?
That's one big database you're building.
It is, it is. And you know, it's interesting because as I begin to search, one of my rules is don't reinvent the wheel.
Yes, good.
So I had envisioned this app that people who are helping people, you know, out on the street, if they come across someone who needs medical, they go to their city, they hit medical for homeless, and they go. And so I was trying to figure out how do you do the fundraising and who's going to create the app and the whole bit. Well, there's already one.
There you go.
It's called Our Calling. It's already mapped. It's not filled with the data, so I'll be out encouraging people, update your
Populate
data.
it.
Yeah, let's make sure Hope's Corner's in there. Let's make sure Dignity on Wheels is in there so that if I'm working East Palo Alto or Mountain View, we have the access to getting people help almost instantly if the need arises.
Well, this online business, that means creating even more trust, right?
Well, it does.
Yeah.
It does.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because one of my board of directors, one of their big things is, you know, you may have to literally grab them by the hand and take them to the service.
Oh, yes, I think so.
You know, and so having that application where I could actually contact someone and say, look, I have someone that I think is mentally ill. I'm not qualified to help them with that.
But they
How
need
do we
an
get
advocate,
them help?
right? They need,
Exactly right.
Yeah. So there's this combination of using technology to your benefit, but then also the personal one-on-one and the handing off to the right people at the right time.
Right. And as you might imagine, if we've had someone on the streets for 20 years or longer, they're not going to have had a cell phone. They're not going to have had a personal data assistant.
That's
so they don't
right.
even think in that regard. They don't think, oh, Google it, right? And so you're going to have to help them with that, and they're going to have to trust you in order to do that.
And many are very smart. And so part of the barrier is to be able to acknowledge what they can bring to the party to help themselves. And I think getting to that point where they want to be helped,
Right.
Identifying those people, that's a real tricky thing to do.
It is. And I think there's an extrapolation off of the organizational change work that I've done. So whenever I've worked with an executive and they've had a major change, one of the questions I've always asked them is who's ready to change now with a little help? Who could get ready to change if you know, they had the right training, the right design, right plan, and who will not make it?
Yep.
And the homeless community has that same population.
I bet they do.
We have people who have just fallen off into homelessness that are more familiar with being part of society than they are with homelessness. We've got to find them and get them back on board very, very quickly. The VA, by the way, does a wonderful job of tracking that.
Good.
So we have a model. We just have to extrapolate that and get other people doing it as well.
I've always found being an aggregator brings a lot of satisfaction because you really can see how to leverage and then that personal payoff. Yeah, it's great work.
And it's interesting because we have all kinds of assumptions about these groups. You know, so one of them is that they just say, you know, God bless you or thank you because they want something. And the reality is they're some of the most gracious people I've ever met.
I do see that when they, yes, I do see that. So tell us just briefly about how the workshops actually work.
So there's right now there's 5. The first one is acknowledging your challenges and fears. And so just giving them a chance in small group session and then large group session to kind of identify those things and lay those out. I find working on the street, many of them want to tell their story. And the real message in their story is I didn't choose to be here. Because a lot of the assumption about homeless is that they choose to be on the street.
That one paycheck away story.
Yeah. Or the Vietnam vet that got
Veteran.
lost, or the Afghanistan veteran that had PTSD. And so a lot of them want to tell their story, so we've got to give them a chance to do that. At the end of that first workshop, though, our message is all of that is true, but not useful for where you're going. So the next step is to say, let's bring your challenges and your fears into perspective. And so really working around what are the steps for kind of analyzing this. They're a wonderful audience. Here in Mountain View, it's primarily male. And they tend to like to one-up each other with stories. So if you get them to tell their story, someone's going to say, well, you think you had it bad. And so in doing that, what we do is we get them to understand that there's always a story that's worse than yours, and always one that feels easier.
Yes.
And so you put it in perspective.
Well, for each one of them to take their own leap into that next step.
Correct.
It's going to be different for each person.
Yeah, as it is with any change. Change
sure.
happens at different paces.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So very quickly, 3 is around then setting up a plan or a strategy. 4 is around what resources, mentorship, mentors do you need, and then 5 is giving yourself a break. So we want them to acknowledge they're going to slip, they're going to fall, they're human, and give yourself a break.
That's sometimes the hardest, isn't it?
It
Because
is.
when you're on a different path, to have to actually admit those things.
Right.
But I've found that's when you can learn, that's when you can grow. If you'll just say, no, I don't know everything.
Well, that's right. And so mentors, as you might have guessed, become very, very important.
Yes.
And my plan of attack is that you'll have some professional mentors, those of us that are change consultants, and we understand how to manipulate this, but also graduates of the workshops who have found their way come back and mentor. And so we know from all of the AA and NA and some of those that sponsors become a very big part of the program.
Yes.
Because they can say heroin is mine, what's yours, right? They have street cred with the homeless. So my little brother has been invaluable in sharing with me what are all the wonderful things that I need to know about the homeless community.
Yes, when we don't know, we really need to get up close and personal to find out what that really is. Well, tell our viewers just one success story, someone you're really proud of.
Great. So I have a fond spot in my heart for Monterey. One, because a large part of the homeless are veterans, and I'm a veteran myself. And 2, because it was the first place I tested. So I'm a big believer in test to learn.
Good.
Or proof of concept. And so my wife goes down on an annual business trip every year. And so last year, right after starting DHM, I went down loaded with care packages and wasn't sure if I was right. I had some advice from my little brother. By the way, socks are gold in the homeless community.
Hygiene kits and socks. I learned that.
Yep. So had 2 pairs of, washed, clean socks, dry socks, toothbrush, toothpaste, hairbrush, the whole bit. Didn't know if they would receive it, didn't know how they would accept it, didn't know the population very well. Went down with 10 kits and thought I'd come back with 9, and I went down with 10 and came back with none.
Oh, great.
So went through and had reinforcement for my belief about the 3 audiences. So I met Toby, who is mentally ill on some level, sweet kid, gave him a package, saw him 3 other times that day, called him by name, and he was perplexed on how I knew his name, but he was hugging his package to his chest.
Oh, my goodness.
So
where's Toby today?
We've gotten him out.
Good.
So he's off the street,
Good. And going through your 3 steps.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
But he's one of those that will probably never be able to change, so he needs help.
Yes, sounds like it.
A help that's probably more at the government level than it is at the Deep Hole Ministry level.
Well, we know that people out there want to help you with Deep Hole Ministries. So how do they reach you? So
very simply, they can find me on Facebook, they can find me on LinkedIn, and they can directly to the website, www.deepholeministriesinc.com.
With the ink on there before the .com.
Correct.
Very good, Bruce. Thank you so much for being with us today. Good fortune in the work you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you.